Hey everyone, in this video I want to show you guys how to set up a web server using Apache. Now to get started, the first thing we have to do is we have to install Apache, and we can do that with a sudo apt update and then a sudo apt install Apache 2. So let's go ahead and update first, just to make sure we download the latest Apache version, and then we can do a sudo apt install Apache 2. All right, once Apache is installed, let's verify that it's running. And right now we can see that it says it's active, which means it's running. If yours says inactive, just do a systemctl start Apache 2, and that'll start the service. Now, we also want to make sure that our web server starts up on boot, because right now if we reload our machine, Apache won't by default start up. So to do that, all you have to do is sudo systemctl enable Apache 2, and this will make it so Apache starts up on boot. All right, so the next thing you want to do is you want to make sure if you have your firewall enabled, to allow HTTP and HTTPS traffic. There are 3 basic profiles for Apache that we can use, and all 3 of them just open up a combination of port 80 or port 443, which are the 2 ports used for HTTP and HTTPS respectively. So we can see these profiles using sudo ufw app list. So we have Apache, Apache full, and Apache secure. The only difference is Apache does only port 80. Apache full will allow port 80 as well as port 443, and Apache secure will only allow 443. And if you want to actually see what ports these guys are allowing, and instead of just taking my word for it, you can do sudo ufw app info and then the name of the app. So if we want to do Apache full, this is going to show us what ports it's going to open up. So we can see here it's going to open up port 80 and 443 for just TCP, which is what all web traffic is. All right, so right now I don't have my firewall enabled just for demonstration purposes, so I'm not going to bother doing that. But if you do have it enabled, then you want to make sure that you allow whichever ports you want. Now, by default, Apache comes with a basic site enabled, and this is the default site that always comes enabled when you install Apache. And the way to actually see that default website is just to go to http://localhost, or you can type in the IP address of your machine. So once you do that, you'll be greeted with this page. So this is the default Apache page that's going to come installed with every installation of Apache. Now, this allows us to verify that Apache is working and everything's okay and installed properly. So the next thing I want to show you guys is where the configuration files for Apache are located. So if we navigate to cd/etc/apache2, this is going to be the main directory for all of our configuration files for Apache. And I'm going to do a quick ls, and let me just walk you through some of the main files and folders. I'm not going to cover all of them, but I'm just going to cover the important ones. So here we have apache2.conf. This is going to be our main server configuration file, but you actually won't be making many modifications to this file, because the way it works is that this file imports other configuration files, and we'll be modifying those other configuration files instead of this main configuration files. So at the end of the day, your configurations will ultimately get imported into the main config file, but you won't be making the changes on the apache2.conf file. All right, the next thing we have is conf available. So conf available contains additional server configurations, and this directory is where you're going to store a lot of the global configurations rather than adding them to the apache2.conf. So the files inside the conf-available are the configuration files that will get imported into the apache2.conf that I spoke about earlier. Then we have the mods available, and the mods available directory contains configurations for all your installed modules. And if you aren't familiar with that, modules basically just allow Apache to perform additional functions. So if you want Apache to add an extra feature or something, there may already be a module for it that allows it to do that, and you can just install that specific module. And the configurations for all those modules reside inside the mods-available directory. Then we have the sites available folder, and this directory contains configurations for your virtual hosts. And I'll talk a little bit more about what virtual hosts later on. But basically, virtual hosts allow us to run multiple websites on just one machine or one IP. And even if you're only running one website, you're going to generate a configuration file for that website inside the sites available directory. So all the virtual hosts the configurations are going to reside inside the sites-available directory. And if we go to that folder real quick, you can see we have the default .conf. And so this is the configuration for this default web page that gets loaded. Now you'll notice that for conf-available and sites-available, there's two directories with similar names, with conf-enabled and sites-enabled. And the only difference really is that the sites-enabled and conf-enabled just contain symlinks to the conf-available and sites-available. So if you remember what's inside the sites-available directory, we have these two files. If we go inside the sites-enabled and then do an ls-la, you're going to see that for the one website that we have a symlink that points back to the sites available and then that configuration file. So every website you create, the sites enabled is going to have a symlink back towards the original configuration file. Don't worry too much about that. There's an Apache command when you create a new website that'll automatically configure that for us, so we don't ever really have to worry about it. And lastly, we have the ports.conf, and if we just cat that real quick, it's just going to tell the machine what ports it should listen on. So it's going to listen on port 80 and port 443. But if you wanted to configure your website to run on a different port, then you would have to add it to this page, as well as make the necessary configurations on your site's available config file. So as I stated before, Apache can host multiple websites or domains on the same server, and it accomplishes this by using a concept of virtual hosts. So each website you want to host on your machine will need to be configured as a separate virtual host. Now, as I showed you before, we were able to access the default page when we went to http://localhost, and this default page has been configured as a virtual host. So if you want to just host one website on your machine, you'll still want to configure a virtual host for it. And as I showed you before, if we go into the sites available folder, this is the configuration for that virtual host for the default page that I showed you guys earlier. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this file just to see what the basic configuration looks like. So the first thing is we start off with this opening bracket, and then there's like a closing bracket, and it's basically saying it's going to be listening on port 80 for any IP address. You can specify a specific IP address that the machine owns if you only want to be listening for traffic on a specific interface, but we're going to allow it for all interfaces because we only have one anyways. So that's the basic configuration. Then you're going to have a server admin. So this is just the email of the server admin. So in case there's an issue with the website, you'll see that Apache prints out like a message on the web browser saying, please contact this email if you have any issues. Now the document root is the folder that will be accessible over the web. So if someone goes to our specific website, it's going to present it this specific directory. In a second, I'll navigate to that directory just to show you what it looks like. But I do want to wrap up covering this configuration file. So the last two things I want to point out is this is going to be our error log file, and this is going to be our access log file. So let's go to our document root directory for the default website, which is in /var/www/html. And inside this directory, we have an index.html. And you're going to see this is a common naming convention for your HTML file because Apache's been configured by default to present a user that's navigated to our website with any file that's called index.html. And if we open that up real quick, I'm just going to do sudo vi index.html. It's just a basic HTML file which generates this physical output. So I'm going to show you guys how to create a new website. And the way to do that is we first want to create our document root folder. So as you can see here, this is the one for the default homepage. So I'm going to just go up a directory, and I'm going to make a new directory. And let's say we want to call our site Fat Chicken. I'll call this directory, either Fat Chicken or fatchicken.com, whichever one you want. You don't actually have to call it the name of your website, but it makes it a little easier to troubleshoot if it at least matches the name of your website. And we're going to need root access for that. And when inside this directory, once we move inside of it, I'm going to create an index.html file just like our default web page had, so that if a user goes to fatchicken.com, he's going to be presented with that HTML file. And basically you can just put up, if you know HTML, feel free to just configure whatever you want. I just have a basic boilerplate template for HTML files. This is all you're really going to need. This is going to be the title at the top, and then we're going to have an h1 tag, which stands for header, and it's basically saying I'm too fat to fly. Okay, so we saved that file. Now we have to configure a config file for the virtual host. So let's go back to the Apache configuration directory. And we want to go inside the sites available folder, because this is where we configure each individual virtual host. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make a file, and technically we can call it whatever we want, but I'd rather name it something that makes sense, like the name of our website. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the default configuration file, because for the most part it already has everything we need. We'll just change up a few lines. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to copy it to a file called fatchicken.conf. And then we're going to open up fatchicken.conf. So I'm going to go over the lines that we need to change. So the server admin, change that to whatever email you like. I'm just going to leave it because I don't really care about that. What we do want to do is see this line that says server name. We want to uncomment this. So this is where we specify the domain name. And I'm going to delete the example. And we're going to have www.fatchicken.com. Actually, we're going to do just fatchicken.com, and then we also want to do server alias www.fatchicken.com. So that way it'll respond to requests for both fatchicken.com as well as www.fatchicken.com, because I guess those are technically two different domains. Now we want to change the document root. Remember, we created a directory called fatchicken, and then within that fatchicken directory we have the index.html file that'll get loaded. And that's all the changes that you need to make. So go ahead and save the configurations. So now what we want to do is we want to enable that website. So to enable a website, you have to do sudo a2nsite, and then the name of the config file that we made. So we're going to call that fatchicken.com file. And what this is doing is it's just basically letting us know for these changes to take effect, we have to reload Apache. But before we do that, we can verify if all of our Apache configs are okay before we actually reload it by doing the command sudo apache 2ctl config test. And you can see that we get one log message saying, it could not reliably determine the server's fully qualified domain name. Ignore that. We can. That's just one simple config change that we'd have to make on the Apache 2.com file, but it doesn't really impact. It doesn't really impact how Apache functions, so you can, for now, just ignore that log message. Now let's go ahead and restart Apache. And now that it's restarted, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my other Ubuntu VM, and I'm going to navigate to fatchicken.com. And let's see if that works properly. So if we go to fatchicken.com, you can see that we get presented with the I'm too fat to fly H1 tag that we made. So we are successfully making it to the web server that we just configured. And if we go to www.fatchicken.com, it also goes there as well. So that means our new website that we created is working just as we expected, and that's pretty much how you do it. I'm going to configure one more site just to make sure you guys fully understand how to do this. But before I do that, I do want to point out that if you're trying to do this exact same setup in your home lab or whatever, you need to make sure that this virtual machine knows to go to the IP address of the actual web server, which right now is 192.168.0.6. So if you have like an internal DNS server, you have to make sure that Fat Chicken points to that 192.168.0.6 address. Or then if it just goes out to the Google DNS servers, they'll have no idea what fatchicken.com is. Or it might actually be an actual fatchicken.com webpage somewhere on the internet, and it'll take you there instead. So all I did, I just went and configured inside the host file an entry. And we can see there's fatchicken.com goes to 192.168.0.6. And our next site that I'm going to create called Got Beef is also going to go to that same exact IP address. And that forces traffic to go towards that other server instead of going to, some arbitrary site or potentially not being able to resolve that DNS request. All right, so let's create a new website called Got Beef. The first thing we want to do is create the document root. And we're going to just make one called Got Beef. And let's just make a random file called index.html, and I'll just do the same thing. I'll just put in an h1 tag, and we'll just say Then we want to go back to the Apache configuration file, and we want to navigate to the sites available so we can create a new virtual host for that new website. And I'm just going to copy the fatchicken.conf, sudo cp fatchicken.conf, and make a file called gotbeef.conf. And then we'll open that up and just make a few minor tweaks. So we want to change the server name and server alias. And we want to point to our new document root. All right, after we save that, we want to enable the new website. So we do sudo a2 nsite, then the name of that configuration file. And we'll do a sudo apache 2ctl config test just to make sure our config is okay and everything looks okay. And then we can go ahead and restart Apache. Now if we go to our other VM and navigate to gotbeef.com, it should work. There we go. Who's got the beef? All right, so we've created two sites. The only problem is at this point, these sites only use HTTP. So when I'm typing in got beef, I'm really typing in http://got beef. And if you aren't familiar with HTTP or HTTPS, HTTP is insecure. So pretty much any website you go to is going to be only accepting HTTPS because it's safer and reliable and secure. So, this is going to work, but then if I change this to https://got beef, it's going to fail because right now it's not been configured for SSL. And we have to go ahead and set up SSL if we want HTTPS traffic to work. And if you aren't familiar with SSL or TLS, which is like the newer version, TLS and SSL work by using a combination of public certificates and private keys. And the SSL key is kept secret on your server. So the web server is going to have an SSL key that's going to be kept on it, and it's going to be, it's not going to be shared with anyone. And then it's going to be, and that key is going to be used to encrypt the content sent to clients. So when this client goes to gotbeef.com and it sends an HTTP GET request towards our server is going to use that key to encrypt traffic when it sends that index.html file back to this client. Now the SSL cert is publicly shared with anyone requesting the content, and it can be used to decrypt the content signed by the respective SSL key. So we're going to create a key and a cert, and basically the user, when they request the got beef and they get the index.html file, which is encrypted using the key that gets generated, it'll then use the cert that's shared by our web server to then decrypt that traffic so that it can actually make use of it and see the contents of that file. Now we can create a self-signed certificate using OpenSSL, and for what I'm doing for demonstration purposes, or if you're just trying to configure a server for internal usage, that's perfectly fine, and it'll work just fine. But if you want to make a website publicly accessible through HTTPS, as in it's going to be available on the internet so that anyone can access it, you'll want to install a commercially signed SSL certificate. And the reason for that is so that people, when they visit your site, they don't get some warning in their browser about an unsafe connection. Because your browsers are configured by default to throw out that warning if it's not commercially signed. And since we're signing our own certificates, then it's going to throw back an error. So let's go back to our Ubuntu server, our web server, and let's generate a self-signed certificate. And the way to do that is using OpenSSL, and that's already installed by default, but if you don't have OpenSSL installed, just do a sudo apt install OpenSSL. And the command we want to do is this following command, and I'm just going to paste it in because it's a fairly long command. And I'm going to change this to fat chicken and fat chicken. So OpenSSL is the command. Then we're using the request-x 509, and what this is basically saying is that we want to create a new cert. And so OpenSSL is the command that we're using. Then we want to request a self-signed certificate. So that's what these two options are for right here. And this certificate's going to be valid for 365 days. This line right here is basically saying we want to generate a new key with a new RSA key with 2048 bits. Then the next line where it says key out, this is technically optional, but we're just basically specifying where we want to store the key. So I'm going to store it in /etc SSL private, and then I'm going to store it with the name of fatchicken.key. And then the next option is the dash out. So this is going to be where we store our certificate. And I'm going to store our certificate in /etc/ssl/certs. And then I'm going to name that cert fatchicken.crt. And you can obviously name your cert and your keys whatever you want, and you can technically put them wherever you want. But these are generally good places to save them. And I like to name my certs something that makes sense. So I figured naming it after the website is going to make perfect sense. Then go ahead and enter, and it's going to prompt you for some information, and you can go ahead and fill out most of this stuff or ignore most of it. I'll show you. You really only have to fill out one line, but we can put the country code, US, state, just put North Carolina. Who cares about city or organization name? We'll just do Fat Chicken Industries. We'll ignore that. Now this is the important one. So here you want to put either the domain name or the IP address of my machine. So my IP address is 192.168.0.6, so I could put that, or I can just do fatchicken.com. And we can skip email address as well. So we've generated our cert, and you'll see if we navigate to these directories, they'll be in there. So they're there. I don't feel like showing you guys because it's just a waste of time. Just trust me that they're there and they were created. So now we need to update our virtual host configuration file to make it so that they are configured to actually accept SSL traffic. So we're in our sites available directory, and let's update fatchicken.conf. And you see this first block that we have? This is for HTTP, so insecure traffic. So we're going to create a new block for SSL traffic. So we're just going to go right down here, and I'm going to do the same syntax, virtual host, but this time instead of doing a *:80, we're going to do *:443 because that's the port for HTTPS. And you can technically change this too. Like if you didn't want to be listening on port 443 for traffic and you wanted this website to operate on port 5000, you could do that as well. So the few things that you need: server admin. I don't really care about putting valid information. I'm just going to put in the default. Then you want the document root. So this is going to point to the same exact folder that the HTTP traffic will, so we can just copy this line. For server name and server alias, we're going to want the same exact information as we did for HTTP, so just paste that in. And we're going to want to copy the log file. So most of the configurations are going to be exactly the same, and up to this point everything has been the same. Now this is where it gets different. We're going to want to put in the line SSL engine, and then we want to turn that on. Then we want to tell the machine where the SSL certificate is for this file. So we do that with the command SSL certificate file. Then we're going to provide the location of that. So that's going to be /var, whoops, not /var, /etc//certs/fatchicken.crt. And if you're confused as to where I'm getting that from, we actually have to, let me open up a new tab actually. And remember, this location is what I specified in the OpenSSL command. So just point it to wherever you saved your certificate if you decided to use a different location. Then we need to point it to where the certificate key is. And that's going to be stored in /etc/ssl/private/fatchicken.key. The last thing we need to add, I'm not going to type it out because it takes a little while. I'm not going to type it out because I feel like I'll probably mess it up. So just open up a new tab real quick and go back to the sites available folder and then cat this default-ssl.conf. So you can use this configuration file as a template for formatting all your SSL configurations. And we basically just want to copy this section right here. See where you see it, where it says files match and directory, just copy that part. And we can just paste it in here. And then we have to close out this block. And that should be all the SSL configuration that we need. All right, so we finished the configuration for the SSL. Now we have to actually enable an Apache module to handle SSL. So you can do sudo a2nmod to enable an Apache module, and we're going to call it's called SSL. All right, so it's been configured, and we'll have to restart Apache for that to take effect. Let's just verify our configurations are okay with Apache 2CTL config test. And everything looks okay. And we can go ahead and restart that then. All right, so it should be working now. So if we go to our other server and we go to HTTPS this time, and then we do fatchicken.com, it should give us this potential security risk ahead. And the reason it does that, remember, is because we used a self-signed certificate. If you don't want to see this message on your server, you want a commercially signed certificate, like provided by like VeriSign or whoever. So if you want to continue going to your website, just hit advanced. You could technically view your certificate if you wanted to. So you can see here the common name, Fat Chicken, and all that information it prompted you for, it's all stored in this certificate. So you can see Fat Chicken Industries, and then it's got a few other information, and it's got a few other things, but you can close that out and just hit accept the risk and continue. And there you go. It took us to our web page, and we've got the lock. So that means it's encrypted traffic. There's a triangle instead of a green lock because it's not a commercially signed certificate, and all of our web browsers are configured to give us that warning when we accessing a web page using a certificate that isn't commercially signed. Now there's one more thing I want to show you guys how to configure. And if we go to http://fatchicken.com, you can see that we can still access the HTTP page, which is perfectly fine if that's what you want. But usually most sites nowadays, since they want to be as secure as possible, what they'll do is if you try to access http://fatchicken.com, it'll redirect you to HTTPS. So it's going to redirect you to the secure connection instead of using an insecure connection. And we can configure that in Apache, and I'll show you guys how to do that. So we're still in our sites available folder, and as pretty much what we've been doing is anytime we want to configure or make any changes to a specific website, then we want to make changes to that specific site's configuration file within sites and available. So we're going to make some changes again to fatchicken.conf. Now, if you remember how our our thing was structured, the first section is for HTTP traffic, and the second section, and you'll know it's the second section because it starts with 443. That's for SSL or secure traffic. So what we want to do is when a user sends a request to on port 80 for HTTP traffic, we want to redirect it. So the configuration change is going to be made in this first block. And so just find an empty line. Make sure it's before the end of the block though. And the line that we need to put is redirect quotations / quotation, and then quotation, and then https : / and then your domain name. So this is going to be fatchicken.com. So this is basically saying if someone sends traffic to http : / fatchicken, we're going to redirect it to https : / fatchicken.com. So now we can test our configuration. Everything's okay. And then we can restart Apache 2. And if we go to our other site, our other machine, and we go to http : / fatchicken.com, you're going to see we get the lock because it actually redirected it to HTTPS now. So it automatically does that for you, and it makes our it makes the communication between the server and the client secure automatically. Now you'll notice that if we go to 192.168.0.6, we still have that default page. So that page is still available. That web page is still available, and it's actually the default one, which means that if any, I guess like HTTP GET request gets sent to our web server and it doesn't match any of the virtual hosts we've configured, the user will get presented with the default website. So what we can do is, let's say we didn't want that. We can go ahead and actually remove that website, and the way to do that is using the command sudo a2 dis site and then the name of the configuration file for that site. So the configuration file for the default site is this file right here, so we can just specify that. And then once we do systemctl reload Apache 2, that should disable the default website. So now if you try to go to localhost, it's going to fail. And right now, the GotBeef website still doesn't handle SSL traffic. If you guys want to practice, I'd recommend you trying to configure the GotBeef website by yourselves. It's just pretty much follow exactly what I did for the Fat Chicken website. The only difference is when you get to the server name and server alias, just change it to GotBeef and make sure that the SSL block portion of the configuration file points to the correct document root as well. And just to wrap things up, I did want to show you guys two cool commands. So if we are on the client trying to access the website, and we go here, let's go ahead and install the Nmap package. So we do sudo apt install Nmap. Now using Nmap, we can actually do a couple of things. We can see information about the certificate that a website's presenting us, and we can also see information about what SSL and TLS protocols it supports, or what versions of them they support. So if we do nmap -- script SSL -cert, and then we want to do -p for the port, and it's going to be port 443 because we left it as the default port, and then we do the fatchicken.com, it's going to show us information about the cert that it's that's being used for that site. So we configured it for 2048 bits. The issuer, it's self-signed, and then it's got the information about the organization name, the state, the country, and things like that. It's got the MD5 hash as well as the SHA. All right, and the last command I wanted to show you was we can do nmap -- script ssl -enum -ciphers -p443 and the name of the site. And what this command is going to do is it's going to show us the different SSL and TLS versions that this website supports, or that Apache configuration supports. And it's also going to show us the ciphers that it supports. So you can see here for TLS version 1.0, it's going to show us we support that, and these are all the ciphers that it supports for that. We also support TLS version 1.1. We also support TLS version 1.2, and these are its respective ciphers. Anyways, guys, that's pretty much everything I wanted to show you. I do want to point out that this is very basic bare bone configuration of Apache. So this server is not technically ready for production. There's still a lot of things you'd have to do to really harden it and make it more secure. And there's a lot of modifications that you'd have to make before it truly is production ready. But I just wanted to make a video to show you guys how to get started with Apache, so that you can at least kind of get a basic understanding of, what files are you supposed to make configurations to, what do each configurations change, and what are some things that I need to do to enable SSL and things like that. And hopefully you guys found this video helpful. I'll probably be making a video on Nginx as well, which is another web server that you can use on Linux.